Alright guys, welcome back. This is Mr. Arnold. Take 2 of trying to make the Unit 1, What is Biology? What is Biology? Study guide video / review for the summative assessment. As we have learned through this unit, you should know what biology simply means. Bio meaning life. Ology is meaning the study of. So biology meaning the study of life. With the study of life comes also understanding the impact of living versus non-living things. All living things are going to interdepend or rely on not only other living organisms, like we rely on animals and plants for food, etc. from there, but also non-living organisms for habitat, shelter, protection, possibly, depending on where we go from there. So just understanding what biology is, the study of life, how organisms are related, how organisms work together, and how they interdepend on other things. Some characteristics of life, and we'll see if this works here today. Some things that all living things should have in order to be considered alive. First of all, they're made up of cells, or at least a cell. You can have single-celled organisms as well as multi-celled organisms. Organisms also have this desire to maintain a stable and internal environment. That's called homeostasis. Essentially, as organisms respond to their surroundings, they're trying to keep themselves in check or in limbo, or not in limbo, but in check or in equilibrium as they go through. Meaning if you're cold, you start to shake, your body is shaking to produce heat energy from the food that you have eaten at some point in time. If you're hot, you start to sweat, your body's releasing that heat energy, just a way to maintain that stable internal environment or homeostasis. Organisms need to use energy. So whether they are autotrophic, where they are making their own energy, or whether they are heterotrophic and they're going out and getting their energy, they are going to use energy from that production, or from the use of energy, you're going to produce waste, so you're going to have to get rid of that waste. There's one of 2 ways that you could do that. I'll let you guys figure that out on your own. Grow and develop. Obviously, organisms are going to grow, whether that's physically by size and also develop over time. The ability to reproduce doesn't mean you have to reproduce. Doesn't mean that all organisms will live long enough to reach reproductive age, but to have that ability to reproduce. There are many other ones, responding to stimulus, those kinds of things that all kind of fit into these characteristics of life, characteristic of life. Everything is going to need to have those in order to be considered alive. If it doesn't have those, then it isn't considered truly alive, and that's where the concept of the virus comes in. The virus itself cannot get its own energy. It relies on absorbing the energy from the host cell. So if you get a virus, that virus attacks your cell. It uses the energy from your cell to do its functions. It relies on a host cell to reproduce the genetic code for the virus. And then if you take the virus out of that environment, it goes bye-bye, thanks for playing, dead. Got it? Good. Great. So taxonomy, another thing that we worked a little bit on in this unit. Taxonomy is just classifying of organisms based on similar characteristics or shared characteristics. You have the domains of life. There are really 3 things that everything is broken down into. Either bacteria, archaea, or a eukarya, which is us. We're going to focus on eukarya. Those are the organisms that you're most used to using every day or seeing every day. Inside of the domains of life, so the domain is the biggest one. It's the top that everything is broken down into. And then from there, we continue to break them down into smaller and smaller groups so that we can see how closely they are related to each other. The taxonomy kind of code, so to speak, is King Philip, comes often for ginger snaps. That helps remind you of the order that they go. You have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. As they move down that line, if they have those categories in common, that means they're really, really, really closely related. If they don't have those categories in common, they are not very related at all. Again, King Philip comes often for ginger snaps as a way to kind of help remember that order. And again, as we move down from kingdom to phylum, if we are in the same kingdom, we're not really closely related. That could be us as animals, talking about sharks, talking about humans, talking about birds, or any of those. We're not really closely related. But as we move down to phylum, to class, to order, to family, we become more and more closely related. If we are in the same genus, we are pretty stinking close to being related, and if we are in the same species, we are related and able to reproduce fertile offspring. So as we go down, the numbers get smaller and smaller because we're getting very precise or specific, and we are becoming very closely related. If we move up, the numbers of organisms become very high, but the actual relationship of these organisms becomes very, 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 very wide. Inside of that system, we have the binomial nomenclature system, which is just a two-name system. It is the genus name and the species name that is given to every organism. So if you travel around the world, you talk to other scientists, you'll be able to communicate with them. They would know exactly what you're talking about. Here in the United States, we might call something a house cat. In Europe or maybe in Africa, they may call it a completely different name. So by using the two-name system, we can communicate a little bit more effectively. Felis is the genus name for the house cat. Notice that it is italicized. Sorry about the handwriting. And the first name is always capitalized, the genus name, so it's capital F for Felis. And then Catus is the species name for the house cat. It is never capitalized, but it is italicized as well. If we're talking about a regular dog that we have at home, Canis is the genus name for that, and Familiaris is the species name. So you'll notice there are Felis, Catus, there's Felis, Lupus, there's a bunch of different types of genus and species name. The Felis is referring to the cat. The Catus itself is referring to what specific type of cat we're talking about. So a lion or a puma or a tiger would have a different species name than Catus. Same thing with dogs. There are a bunch of different types that we could be talking about. Canis is referring to all of the dogs. Familiaris is referring to the specific house dog that you and I probably used to having. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, one of the things that I just remembered that you do need to be able to work with are cladograms. Cladograms will show up on the state test at the end of the year, so you need to be familiar with how to read them. Basically, a cladogram is a kind of linear look at how organisms are related, and then not only how they are related, but what is the characteristic or feature that kind of lumps them or collects them together. So looking at this cladogram, you have your common ancestor down here, and that is the line that you see running up and diagonally to the right. Time for this instance is moving to the right as well, getting further and further into time as we come from some whatever common ancestor, bacterial cell or whatever it might be. So as we move up the line, we hit our first little node here, and that is where one of the major features kind of sets organisms apart. So we may run into first organism with a vertebrae. So from there, you have a line that comes off of there, and you also still have the other part of the Y that's continuing up. Anything from that node up is going to feature that distinguishing characteristic, which for our purposes is the vertebrae. So everything here is showing that it has a vertebrae of some sort. In this kind of group over here, we also have a dorsal fin that pops up. So we are now evolving and changing into a dorsal fin, and that might be our scaled fish, like our panfish, bluegill, crappie, perch, those kinds of things might fit there. You'll notice after the dorsal fin, anything that goes above the dorsal fin still has the dorsal fin, but we also have another node or another feature here. Now we have vertebrae that have a dorsal fin, but also have lungs, which could be our dolphins or aquatic mammals, those kinds of things. So as we kind of work through here and look at these cladograms, we're starting to show these relationships and how they go. Now, if we continue beyond this first node, we still have our organisms with a vertebrae. We have another node. This node now is organisms that have wings have appeared. So off of that node, we go up we notice that feathers start to pop in. That could be your robin or any kind of birds from there. As we continue here beyond the wings, now we have vertebrae with wings that are continuing to go up. And again, the whole point of the cladogram is for you to be able to start to draw those relationships of organisms and the defining characteristics that separated them all the way back from whatever that common ancestor is. So common ancestor, we hit our first little node. That's where we have our change to vertebrae. Anything beyond or up have vertebrae. Off of that vertebrae, we also had organisms that developed. They decided to develop a dorsal fin. Off of there, we keep moving up. We now develop lungs with the dorsal fin, and we end up over here by the dolphins. These cladograms can look in various ways. The whole key of it is finding where the common ancestor is and then moving time in the right direction. So for this first one over here, it is backwards to what we just showed, which means time is now not moving to the right, it is moving to the left. So we're getting further and further in time as we move up and to the left. D is still our common ancestor. We hit our first node. There was some feature that happened there. B and C kind of broke off from there. Actually, C broke off from there. And then we hit another node where organism B breaks off from there. If we continue up past the point of where C broke off, you'll notice there is another node for A to kind of break off and start to develop. Now, A has the same feature that C has that broke off. So A and C have kind of developed some of the same features, but A went in and evolved a little bit more and started its own little branch from there. The second one over here on the right is just the same thing. This time we are working our way up. D is our common ancestor. Time is moving as we go up. As we split those little nodes or those features that we see, again, if it's vertebrae, dorsal fin, whatever it happens to be, as we continue to move up from there. Again, this is Unit 1. You will see cladograms again. You'll see the binomial nomenclature system again, so just make sure that you are paying attention to what's going on. As always, if you have any questions, please see myself or Mrs. Villardo. Cool. Thanks.